The way the lookup transformation works is that it usually caches the lookup data set in memory and then compares each row from the input pipeline against that cached lookup data. Although the end result is the same, using the join in T-SQL is set-based, whereas the lookup transformation works row by row as the data streams in from the data flow pipeline. Now, it's important to understand that the lookup transformation actually references an external data source in its processing. You can use the component to join only 2 data sets at a time. So if you need to join more data sets, you'll need to join multiple lookup transformations together. Then you join the output data flow of the previous transformation with a new external data set. The lookup transformation checks for a key value provided in the input against an external reference table. If the lookup finds the key in the external table, the row passes down the data flow pipeline. Otherwise, the lookup transformation either directs the row to the unmatched output or redirects the row to the error pipeline, depending on how you configure the transformation. You can append columns from the lookup data set into the pipeline when the lookup transformation finds a match, just as you can with a join operation in a T-SQL statement. Lookups behave synchronously, which means that it doesn't block the data flow pipeline while it performs its work. Rows continue to enter the transformation while processed rows are output. The one exception is when caching is used in certain ways. Then the transformation may have to block the data flow while it loads its cache with data. This potentially means that the lookup transformation could make heavy use of memory resources, unlike a merge-join transformation. In this demo, I'm going to create a package that performs the same actions as I did with the merge-join transformation example. I'm going to extract data from related product tables in the AdventureWorks 2012 database. But this time, I'm going to use a lookup transformation instead of a merge-join transformation. So here I am within SQL Server Data Tools. I'll create a new project, and I'll call this Lookups. And as usual, I'll go over here to Solution Explorer, rename that as well from the default package name. I'll call it Lookups as well. Nothing magic about naming the package the same as the project, just a convenient naming to identify what it is. And there we have a new package. All of the work, again, is going to be done within a data flow. So I'll come over here to the SSIS toolbox, double-click on that, and then go over to the Data Flow Designer. Next thing I need to do is create a connection manager to my AdventureWorks 2012 database. I'll right-click, select New OLEDB Connection, and I have an existing connection, so I'm going to use that. But as usual, if I didn't, I could use the New button in order to create one. All right, so now I'm ready to start creating data sources. I'll come over here to the SSIS toolbox and come down here to Other Sources, OLEDB Source. I'm going to name this Product Data Source because I'm going to read product data. And then double-click on it to configure it. I want to use the AdventureWorks 2012 database. I'm going to use a SQL command to get the data. So far, all of this is just like what I did for a merge join. And I'll go over to Management Studio. But the first difference that arises is that I'm not going to sort the data. So I'll just copy that part of the select statement, come over here, put in a semicolon, and so now I'm getting the name, list price, product model ID, product subcategory ID. Again, I'm still going to need those fields in order to join on external data, and I'm going to display the name and list price within my output data flow and bring it in from the product table. The important thing here is that the lookup transformation, unlike the merge-join transformation, does not require sorted data. So, if you want to include an order by, go for it. But it's not necessary, and it won't affect the final results of the package, other than to change the order of the final rows that come out of well, certainly as they flow down until you sort them differently. Okay, but include it, don't include it, whatever you want to do. All right, click on the preview button, and once again, we see that data from the product table. All right, that configures the data source, so I'll close that. Now, at this point, we only need a single data source because the lookup to the second table is going to happen within the lookup transformation. So it's time to add one of those. So I'll come over here and scroll up to lookup. And I'll connect the product data source output It's interesting. It's not. There it goes. Problem was that I was selecting it, but it wasn't giving me the arrows down below. So not sure what's up with that. Another weirdness in the designer. So I'll connect that to the lookup. And then I want to rename this because I'm going to have multiple lookups in this package. And I'll name this subcategory lookup. Okay, double click on it. Now we need to configure it. Now I'm going to leave the default settings for the cache mode and the connection type. As you can see, the default is full cache, which generally gives you the best performance. And then I'm using a data source, so I'm going to use an OLEDB connection manager. I do have the option of using a cache connection manager as well. But we do need to make a change here. The default setting for how the transformation handles rows with no matching entries is to fail. So it's selected as fail component. But we want those rows to be in the final output data flow. And there are, in fact, some rows that don't have product category and subcategory information. So I'm going to change this to ignore failure. Notice that I can also redirect them to no match output. Maybe there's some additional processing that I can do. Or I can redirect rows to error output because maybe the nature of the data is that if there's no match on the lookup that I'm doing, that's a true error condition. There should be matching rows all the way through. But in this case, like I said, I'm just going to use ignore failure. Now I need to go to the connection page. This is where you specify the source of lookup data. Not the data flow that's coming into it, but the source of the lookup data. Now, it's in the AdventureWorks 2012 database, and I already have a connection manager for that, so I'm going to use that. But if this was coming from an Oracle database or some other database someplace, I would either have to select it from the list if I had a connection manager defined within the package, or I could click on New and define a connection to that database. But in this case, using the lookup transformation, often unlike the merge join transformation, often the data will be in the same database. So this will be fairly common to use the same connection manager. Now I'm going to use a table or view, but I could also use the results of a SQL query. And what I need to do is select the drop-down list box and select the production.product subcategory table. Now the nice thing here is that I can define a SQL query, but in this case, if I just have the table or view, then the component is going to do the right lookup thing. And then if I want to, I can preview the data. Nothing's been joined yet or anything like that, so this is just the raw product subcategory information. So that's handy just to make sure that I have the right table selected if I'm not absolutely sure that I got the name right. Okay. All right, so that defines the connection. Again, keep very clear that this is not the connection to the data flow. That's already coming in from that data source that I defined. So there's data flow coming from that has product information. This is product subcategory information, and it's going to do the lookup to this table within the component. At this point, the transformation knows the schema of the data flow coming into it and where the lookup data is located. But it doesn't yet know which fields to make the join with. To do that, we have to come to the columns page there. So as you can see, I have the available input columns from the data flow. So this is the product information that is coming from that product table. And then I have the available lookup columns. These are the fields from the lookup table that I just defined, which is product subcategory. So the first thing I need to do is tell it which column to join on. In this case, it's the product subcategory. So I'll hold down the mouse and drag it over here onto product subcategory. And that defines that link. What's interesting here is that the component didn't even try to make a guess. I have two data flows, two column names with the same name. Again, unlike the merge join transformation, it doesn't make a guess as to which one is the right one. Now the other thing I need to do is, because I want the subcategory name added to the transformation's output columns, adding it to the data flow, then I want to select the name column right there. And so that's going to output it to the data flow. But I also want the product category ID because I need that column later in order to link to or join to the category table, the product category table. And in both these cases, I want to add them as a new column. But if I wanted to replace other columns of similar types, I could do that. So if this was going to replace the product name, I could select that there. Or the product category ID, I could replace the other integer type fields within the data flow. Okay, but I don't want to do that. I want to add both of those as a new column. But I also can't have duplicate column names, so I'm going to change this to subcategory. Okay, so that's how I define the join between the data flow and that external table. And so what's going to happen as the data flow is processed by that lookup transformation, it's going to do a lookup into the cache or the table directly, depending on how you further configure that component. In this case, it's going to be the cache because I left the full cache default option set. All right, I'm going to move this up a little bit. So I'm going to hold down the Control key and move that up. And move it over a little bit, make it a little bit more organized. And now I want to test. Before I go any further, I want to test this package. So I'm going to use a union all. I'll put it over here to the side. And I'll take the subcategory lookup and drag it over there. And that opens up this input-output selection. The reason I get this dialog box is that the lookup transformation, by default, has two outputs. Lookup match, so it's going to output all of the rows that it has a match for, and then lookup no match. So if it doesn't find a match in that lookup table, the product subcategory table in this case, then it's going to output them to there. But remember that I told it to ignore failures, so everything is going to go to the lookup match. So all of my rows, even if it doesn't find anything, it's going to ignore that failure to find something and put it in the lookup match output. And so that's what I want to map to the input for that union all. Then I want to be able to see the data. So I'll right click on that and whoops, didn't quite get that, and enable the data viewer. So now I can execute the package, press F5 or click the start button there. And I'll go out and display the data at this point. Okay, so there you can see all of the fields. So as you can see, I have 504 rows. So it output all of these rows because it's ignored the failure to find the lookup. It output all of those 209 rows without a match. And then if I scroll down here a bit, you can see that I start getting a match. Okay, so everything looks good, and we can continue configuring the package. I'll get rid of the union all. And now I need to add a join for the product category table. At this point, unlike the merge join transformation, I'm not going to add another data source. I don't need one. I have a data flow. It has the information to do the join into the product category table. And so the product category table is going to be defined within the new lookup transformation. All right, so I'll come back over here, use a new lookup. See if I can actually successfully move it. I can. Cool. All right, so I'll come over here and connect up the data flow. And the output that I want to use is the lookup match, because I can now have a data flow path through here for lookup matches, and then I can have another one for unmatched data. But I only have lookup match output, so I'm going to hook up to that one. And now this lookup has the schema information for the data flow at this point. I'm going to rename this to category lookup. Oops. What happened there is that I was typing in here, but this was still selected. So when I hit enter, it opened up the editor for that data flow. So I'm going to try that again. I won't hit enter. I'll just select elsewhere. And so now we didn't get that dialog box. Okay, double click on this. Once again, use the defaults here. I'm going to ignore the failure because once again, I'm going to have rows that don't match and I want to include them in the same data flow output. Then I need to define the connection. Once again, the data is in AdventureWorks 2012. And this time I want it from the product category. So I'll scroll down here, right there. Okay. But again, I can use this SQL query, have all the same options. And once again, can preview. Notice that this one only has 4 rows. And then I need to define the join. So I'll come over here and I want to use the product category and use that as the join. And then I want to include the name column here. There aren't any other pieces of information that I want. So that's the only one, but I could select multiple columns if I want. And then I once again don't want to conflict with my product name category or product name column. So I'm going to change this to category. And click on OK. And we have a second lookup transformation. I need one more because I need to get the product model data. So I'll grab another one. But down here, it's going to jump to the top. And there, and basically do the same steps. Connect that there. I want the matched output. Because in that component, I also indicated that I wanted to ignore any failures of lookups. And then I'm going to select this component this time before I change the name. And I'm going to name this one model lookup. And this time I can hit enter and we're good to go. And I'll move it down just a little bit. Again, I'm holding the control key and the down arrow. And then double click on it to configure it. Same things. Ignore the failure. Use the same connection. And this time come in and use the product model table. And then define the join. I have product model ID and product model ID. And this time I want to also again include the name, which is the name of the model. And I'll rename this to model. Okay, that's what I need to do in order to configure all of those joins. So I want to test it. So I'll once again use a union all. And I'll grab the output from here, connect it. I want the matched output, and OK. And then I'll right-click on it, enable the data viewer, and I'll run the package by pressing F5. All right, so here's our output data. Let me widen it up a bit. May not be able to make it quite wide enough. Okay, there we go. All right, so as usual, we have our 504 rows. And scroll down, have a bunch of null data. About halfway, a little before halfway down, we start getting all of the information. And there you can see our complete data flow, which was created using lookup transformations. Now what's interesting about this is that there isn't an easy way to remove these intermediate model IDs, the product model ID, the product subcategory ID, and the product category ID. If you recall, within the lookup transformation configuration dialog box, it doesn't have a way to remove any columns from the data flow. If you did want to remove them, you'd need to use another transformation or do it within the data destination. Just opt not to include those columns in the destination wherever it's being written. And in fact, you can even do that within the union all. So if I close this, actually I need to run it to completion. Everything completed successfully. I'll close that. You can see everything ran. I'll stop execution. And if you come in here to Union All, you can opt to ignore any columns here. So the product model ID, you can just select ignore, and then that'll exclude it. But in this case, it's going to exclude it from the output of the Union All, not from this data flow or what's coming out here. So, but there are other options within other kinds of transformations for doing the same sort of thing. So just be aware of that. So that's one kind of small downside of using the lookup transformation. You don't have that level of control over the data flow, the schema of the data flow that's output from it, other than how it looks up the data from the lookup reference table.